Hello, Chris.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. All right. That looks a little different and a little bit better than the mobile.
Yeah,
All we
for
got
sure.
is your chin. Are you able to adjust the camera at all without losing the I
Oh,
guess it's a
yeah.
green screen. Yeah. There. Oh, there you go. Just a little bit more. There you go. Perfect. All right. All right. Excellent. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience and sticking with us. Folks, welcome back to the program. This is Chris Wyatt Reports on the Indaba Africa channel. I'm Chris, retired U.S. Army Colonel, sitting in central Pennsylvania. And you know what? I've got to change that background because after Athol Trollip put his lovely background in there, mine looks kind of like a piker here. So let me just take a quick and change my background, virtual background here. I'll pick one that's appropriate for the Eastern Cape. Let me see if I've got an image here for the Eastern Cape. I don't think I do. I've got Western Cape. Here's some mountains. That'll work. How's that? That looks a little bit better.
Beautiful.
All right, there we go. That's a South African scene behind me there. Welcome back to the program. This is an interview with the provincial chairman of the Eastern Cape for the ActionSA party, none other than Athol Trollip, former mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, and once upon a time a co-panelist with me at a meeting in Somerset West. Athol, you're obviously quite busy, but let me ask you, hoe gaan dit?
Yeah, it gaan baie goed, Chris. Jou Afrikaans is nogal goed. And
Ah, no, ik praat niet Afrikaans niet.
I've always been amazed at how much you know about our country, and it's always a pleasure talking to you. Even your greeting in Afrikaans, not perfect, but still good.
Not as harsh as the judgment from Ronaldo Jose, but kinder than Ronaldo. He's always giving me a hard time about my G's. Anyway, but I think I do say hot fold pretty well. I think I got that one right.
There we go.
All right. Well, listen, Athol, wow, there's something big happening in South Africa on May 29th, the national provincial elections. Action SA is a player in this. The party, founded by Herman Mashaba, seems to be making inroads, but there has been a development in the past several months. That's the formation of the so-called MK party, named after the liberation arm, the armed wing of the ANC, but claiming it's its own party under former President Jacob Zuma, MK. They seem to be getting a lot of traction in KwaZulu-Natal in particular, but also potentially in Gauteng. Is that eating away your support, or are you seeing your support rise, or what's happening? Because the polls are very conflicting. The one thing that's consistent in the polls is that the ANC is declining. MK has come out of nowhere. Action SA numbers are up and down in these polls, so I'm really not sure what to believe. I get the sense that you guys are getting traction, but that's just my sense. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, first of all, Chris, it's always very difficult to poll a party that hasn't participated in an election. I mean, there's no comparative figure, so it's very difficult. And we're a new party, and so are MK. But let me just get the MK thing out of the way because I'm not a spokesperson for MK or the ANC. MK is just another breakaway party from the African National Congress, and I think it's just a natural attrition. No political party lasts forever, and I think the ANC are at the stage of waning, and they've been shedding support. First of all, they lost support to the UDM of Bantu Holomisa, followed by another big splinter with COPE. But I think a lot of the COPE people went back to the ANC. And then, of course, there was a breakaway with Julius Malema's EFF. And now there's a breakaway, ostensibly under two people, Mr. Khoza and Mr. Jacob Zuma. Now, the original founder has been kicked out, so have a lot of other people. And it seems wherever Jacob Zuma is involved in politics, there's always intrigue and allegations of spying and, intelligence and counterintelligence. So MK is in a bit of a mess at the moment. Yes, they have come and made a big bang in South African politics, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, because they're an ethnic-based party, pretty much under Jacob Zuma's leadership. But also, there's a saying, Chris, that says, when thieves fall out, all hell breaks loose. And it seems that there's some major fallout happening in MK, especially around control of funds. So now the original founder has been kicked out, and he's the signatory to the bank accounts. So all of a sudden, everything's stalled. And there have been a number of other people kicked out of the party, youth leaders and various other people. So all's not going well, and a number of big public meetings in the Eastern Cape and in Gauteng were abandoned because there wasn't a big turnout. So I don't think it's all good for MK, and I think the polls initially had them around 14%, but I think that's very speculative. I think it'll be somewhere between 7 and 10%, and even that will be a significant breakaway from the ANC. So that's as far as MK goes. As I said, I'm not a spokesperson for them, but for Action SA, You know, we only participated in 6 municipalities in the last local government election, 6 out of 278. We were able to get 550,000 votes, and we were able to attract 22% in Soweto, and no other party other than the ANC had ever got more than 10% in Soweto. And we got around about 21% in affluent white communities in Johannesburg and also in Pretoria. So we have been able to attract support across ethnic groups and rich and poor communities, which is something quite unique in South African politics. And, you know, a lot of water has gone under the bridge since 2021. It's been nearly 3 years now since the last election. And if I can just reflect on my time in ActionSA, you'll recall that I'd retired from politics very happily, having left my party that I was a member of, an active member and a representative for 38 years. And after 2 years being out of politics and very happily plowing my own furrow in the Eastern Cape, because I'm a farmer and that's what I was doing. I was consulting in the agricultural field. I had Mr. Herman Mashaba, who was the mayor of Joburg when I was the mayor of PE, called me one day and said, you know, could we have a discussion? I didn't really want to go because I knew what he wanted to do. Anyway, out of respect, I had a meeting with him, and after a 4-hour-long meeting, I pretty much said to him, look, strength your South Africa, because the current opposition parties haven't been able to.
The last thing we heard was that it took Herman Mashaba 4 hours to convince you, and that's where it kind of broke off.
Okay, well, I don't know what you were drinking out of that bottle, but as soon as you had a sip of that bottle, I lost my connection.
It's a magical elixir.
After a 4-hour meeting, I basically said to Herman Mashaba, I said, look, you know, I'm not interested. I've had enough. And he looked back at me and said, have you done enough? Now, Chris, you know the Eastern Cape as well as most people in South Africa. And it's pretty much a broken, dysfunctional province, but probably one of the most beautiful. And I thought about that unbelievable question all the way home. It was a vexing question. And when I got home, I said to my wife, I'm going back into politics. I thought she'd leave me immediately. And she said to me, it's in your blood, you must do it. So now I've been doing that for just about nearly 2.5 years. And in those 2.5 years, we've set up structures in every single municipality in the Eastern Cape. It took me about 16 years to achieve that in the DA, considering that most of this province is deeply rural and not your typical kind of DA constituency. And it's been amazing what we've been able to do in 2.5 years. So I believe that the polling is a little bit out, because I don't know if anyone's doing any polling in the deep mountains of the Jogabi area on the border of Lesotho and on the border of KZN in places like Bizana. And so I just think that we're a dark horse in this election. And our president's got a good name. He's got a good reputation. And I think we're the party to watch. I'm not saying we're going to, you know, be the official opposition. I think that would be completely a pipe dream. But I really do think that, you know, the polls are putting us between 3 and 4.5%. And I think we might get double that. And if we get close to 8 to 10%, I think we'll make a hell of a big difference in the politics of this country, because we're heading into coalition governments in a big way, because the days of, you know, domination by one party, political party, are over in South Africa. We've seen it at local government level, and I believe it's coming to us at provincial and national level.
Well, I think that's a fair statement, Athol, as far as a dark horse. And that's why I asked the question, because it seemed like ActionSA was getting a lot of traction in by-elections in Gauteng in particular a while back, and also a lot of the press hasn't been bad. I mean, you know, the legacy media in South Africa isn't always kind, but it hasn't been bad, and that doesn't hurt. But my interest was exactly what you've talked about here. You know, I just ran for office myself and lost badly in my primary race. Learned some very difficult personal lessons about politics. It doesn't matter how many doors you knock on and how enthusiastic people are. That's great. It's how many of them rock up at the polls. Now, that's going to be the challenge, I think, for all political parties. I think that's the biggest party that's most concerned about that is probably the African National Congress. They go to these rallies and they think they have a lot of support. But as we saw in 2021 municipal elections, they shed voters in KZN like viral particles, just sloughing off of them, because people were so angry about the insurrection inside the ANC that was played out in KZN in July 2021 after Zuma turned himself in late in violation of the court order and escort. So what are your feelings? Do you think that the enthusiasm is there? You'll be able to get people out? I mean, if ActionSA could make some waves in Eastern Cape, that would be pretty significant. ANC has had a hammerlock on that province for decades.
Well, Chris, you make a really. I'm sorry about your primary. Politics is not for sissies, though. It's a hell of a. It's a slog, and you get so excited, and you think you're going to get it done, and then people let you down. They don't pitch up. They're not committed. So politics is very difficult, and it can take you up very high and then drop you down a terrible precipice. I know you'll get elected one day. You've put enough into politics. I think you've got it in your blood. But I want to just say that I think our greatest challenge has been to get South Africans to sort of cut their political umbilical cord. And Black South Africans in particular were excluded from politics for hundreds of years in South Africa. And when, liberation came along under President Mandela, there was this kind of lifetime commitment to voting for the African National Congress, the Party of Liberation, which has been the story of Africa. But eventually that commitment does wane. And we've seen, Chris, in 2021, 80% in South Africa did not vote. Those are people who'd voted before and were registered to vote. Only 17 million did vote. So if they mobilized to vote, we could get we could have a new government overnight. So the biggest problem, though, is to break generational voting patterns. I'm a perfect example. I voted. I was a representative for the Democratic Alliance for the DP, and my father was a PFP representative, and my grandfather was a member of Parliament for the United Party. They were all one political party that morphed into others. So I also voted for the party of my forebears and the party of my father and my grandfather, and I thought that would be the way it would be until I quit politics or stopped voting. But I did realize after I left the DA for my own very good reasons, which are not worthy mentioning on this program, but I left the DA because I lost my conviction, essentially. And I voted for the DA in the next election because I could either vote for the ANC or the DA. And then Herman Mashaba mobilized me to get involved, and I did. And I just think that we can offer something to those 18 million South Africans that didn't vote, offer them a different option. We're a new political party. What brings us together, black and white, essentially, is that we're gatvol. You said that word very nicely, which means we've really had enough of the current establishment. And it's been really exciting being in a party of people from all different political persuasions that are coming together in a new political party because they've had enough of the current political establishment. Now, that's quite exciting. And I've seen what's happened in the black communities in our country where blind loyalty was determined how you voted. And obviously there was a lot of intimidation. The ANC always mobilizes its constituency in the last week or so, and they're very good at squeezing their voters, and they have, subliminal, worse than subliminal racism. They push their voters into a corner and say, you've got to vote for the party of your forebears. Otherwise, you will lose everything. You will go back to apartheid. And that's the big scarecrow that they use all the time. But, the one thing about the advancement of time is that people learn from time. And people have seen that no one has lost their grant anywhere in South Africa, whether it's in the Western Cape under DA administration or in KZN under an IFP administration. No one loses their grant. No one gets punished for the way they vote. So I think we're headed for a big thing, especially that more than half of the electorate are in the wilderness, so to speak. They're just not voting at the moment. If they are mobilized to vote for a new political dispensation, which is what we believe we offer, man, then we could surprise everybody.
Well, I agree 100%. It's interesting you talk about blind loyalty. The Republican Party, of course, was founded on the issue of abolition, a single issue party in the United States to end the institution of slavery. They formed in the 1850s and got their first president elected, Abraham Lincoln, in 1860. When the states went into rebellion, it was Republicans who drafted the 13th Amendment, which formally ended slavery, the 14th and 15th, which gave citizenship and also voting rights. But the Republicans, as a consequence of that, had blind loyalty from the African-American, Black American population from the 1860s all the way until the New Deal in the 1930s, when Roosevelt wrested away from them by giving handouts. Up until then, they voted 90+%, and then the whole thing switched almost overnight. So it can happen quickly. For whatever reason, you can get that, and I think we're probably approaching that stage right now. I just to give you an idea, you know this, but for the viewers, you know what I'm getting at. But I was in Northwest my last trip out, and the Forum for Democrats, a small Swan-based party, whom I've been working with and talking to since they established a couple of years ago in Zeerust, they invited me out to Rietvlei. I went out to Rietvlei, and I met folks in an informal community next to what used to be a slate mine. The owner of the land is offered to sell it to the municipality. The ANC has run that municipality since '94. They never buy it. They've made no counter offer. They've never rejected the offer. He wants to sell the land, but they've made no effort to get it. So there are no paved roads. There is no plumbing. There's no fixed structure. There are no ablution units. The electricity is non-existent. And these people vote consistently ANC. So I asked a Gogo, I said, and of course my Tswana is not as great as it should be, but I had someone interpret for me, and I asked the Gogo, I said, so may I ask you a personal question? She said, yes. I said, do you vote? She goes, yes, I vote. It's my civic responsibility. I said, that's awesome. I agree. I have voted every time since the age of 18 in every election. So I appreciate that. I said, so may I ask another question? She said, sure. I said, whom do you vote for? Well, I vote for the ANC. I said, why? Because I'm supposed to. Ooh, and that's the statement right there. That's what you have to overcome. I know you know that, and that's what you're experiencing, but maybe the time is now. Maybe genoeg is genoeg. Maybe South Africans are finally becoming hot full with this nonsense.
Well, Chris, there's a term that's used in the insurance industry called a black swan incident. And I think that South Africa might be heading towards a black swan occurrence, because we have in the Eastern Cape, for example, we've got 70% youth unemployment. And you must remember those gogos or grandmothers that you're referring to, they're the people who bear the brunt of massive unemployment. They're the people who raise their grandchildren, the children of their children. And unfortunately, because of general unemployment in the Eastern Cape being around 46%, it means that the old gogos and grandmothers and grandfathers are at home with their children that they might have educated through extraordinary sacrifices. Their children are at home because they're unemployed. So they've got to look after their children and their grandchildren, and in some cases, great-grandchildren. Now, that's taking its toll on communities in South Africa. And our economy is probably the most important aspect of this election, because unless we do something about the unemployment crisis in this country, we will have a revolution where populists promise, heaven on earth, and make impossible promises. And, we've lost the momentum of the heady days of Nelson Mandela coming to power, where we had the most, advanced and respected constitution in the world. People don't trust the government anymore. So whether you're a local investor or foreign investors from the United States, people don't trust the current government. So in South Africa, we've got about 1.5 trillion rand sitting in bank accounts, dormant, because local investors will not invest in the economy. And foreign investors are not going to invest unless local investors are investing. And the reason why people aren't investing is because we've allowed our infrastructure to collapse, our economic infrastructure. You mentioned potholed roads and unsurfaced roads, but our rail networks have been destroyed. They hardly work anywhere in the country. So we've got massive transportation of kind of goods that should never be transported over land by road. They should be like manganese and coal and iron ore, and those kind of bulk products are being transported by road. And they devastate roads. I mean, they smash roads and they cause horrific road accidents. And that's where we are in South Africa. And then obviously the distrust is manifest or manifold by the fact that our crime levels are so high in South Africa, and our corruption is just rampant. So those are all the big things that turn off investment. And ever since the investor confidence locally and internationally waned after the passing of Nelson Mandela and the moving on of Thabo Mbeki and the arrival of Jacob Zuma and state capture and all of those kind of things, we really are in a quandary. So I believe that this election is going to be fought on who offers the best economic alternative to the overwhelmed ANC. And there's no doubt about that. No one even fights that debate anymore. Where you can go into any community and people will agree with you that the government is overwhelmed. They can't keep the taps, water coming out the taps. They can't keep electricity, going. There's no reliable services of any kind. You receive them intermittently now across the country where the ANC is in power. So this election is not really going to be just about whether you've got load shedding and whether, you have water in your taps and whether there's sewage running down your street. It's going to be about the economy, I believe.
Well, I can't disagree with you even for a moment on that one, Athol. It's interesting as a foreign investor. People ask me, especially for my business consulting services, about investing in South Africa. I said, well, you can make money, but there's risk. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're a corporation, if you're big enough, then the government will demand that you hand over a percentage of your equity to people who have no stake, who've made no commitment, who offer no skills, and bring you no advantage. Not even business connections. So that's purely racist. That's based on skin pigmentation to perpetuate a situation that enriches an elite coterie of Black elites, the nouveau riche, instead of the general population. But I said beyond that, the real issues are you have to provide your own security. You have to hire security forces, G4S or someone like that, to protect your business. Otherwise, it'll be robbed. Things will be stolen all the time. You have to deal with a dichotomy of a first world work ethic amongst people of all ethnicities and genders and races, and a third world approach where very low productivity is an issue. Massive number of people infected with HIV, many of whom fall ill when their CD4 count falls below 200 or 300, and then they have to be away from work. You have tuberculosis issues. You have these roads you talked about, and I've been railing against that for ages, no pun intended, about, Van Riemen's Pass. Van Riemen's Pass is a disaster. It's a death trap, but those trucks coming up and down through there, clogging the roads, that highway, the main artery for all of Southern Africa coming up from Durban, is being destroyed by this heavy volume of traffic that's on there that should all be on the rails that have been just looted and destroyed. Going up to Northwest, looking at the rails, there's nothing there. They even got so far as to dig up the copper in the communications lines that were put there it's just, anyway, we could go on forever about this, but as a foreign direct investor, I've got to provide my own electricity. I've got to provide my own security. I've got to provide my own infrastructure. I've got to repair my vehicles all the time. I've got an inefficient, ineffective workforce. Why in the world would I go to South Africa? It's, Cyril Ramaphosa, during the Ramaphoria nonsense in early 2018, promised to bring $100 billion of foreign direct investment to South Africa. The outflow of capital from South Africa is very much in the opposite direction. It's really sad. So what can ActionSA bring to the table economically? Is there a focus on market-based things, or what's your approach? Because most of the parties' answer to garner votes is, we're going to give you this handout, we're going to give you this handout, not we're going to help the private sector create jobs. Does the ActionSA party have a focus on that?
Yeah, look, I'll come to that in a minute, but I do want to just comment about what you were saying about foreign investors, what they'd have to provide to make their business successful. I do believe that South Africa remains a country of unbelievable potential. We are the gateway to Africa. We are also geopolitically, perhaps more strategically located now than ever before, with what's happening in the Suez Canal, with the Houthis and the war going on there. We've got the whole world shipping coming right past our door. We are really going to have to look at our productivity of our ports. Our three major ports are the three worst performing in the world with regards to a World Bank survey on productivity. So the ships don't even want to stop in South Africa. They pay too much demurrage. It takes too long to load and offload a ship. And that's also hurting us really badly economically, because we produce some of the best citrus and other deciduous fruits that are sold all over the world, and our shipping is so bad that it compromises the fruit, whilst traveling to reach its destination. And if you spend an extra week or so loading, perishable goods, you compromise its shelf life. So these are the things that we're challenged with. But also, Chris, South Africans that live in South Africa, also who pay tax, they have to have a parallel service delivery structure that they have to pay for over and above tax. They have to have private security because they can't rely on the police. They have to have private medical aid because they can't go to a state hospital or rely on an ambulance to fetch you if you have an incident or an accident. They've got to send their kids to private school because the public schools have collapsed. So essentially, South Africans are taxed doubly because they pay tax and do not receive the services that taxpayers should from the government, and then have to do it privately. So it's tough going in South Africa. So we have said we're not making any promises, no pie in the sky promises from us. Our president is a businessman who became a very successful businessman during apartheid, and for a black person, that was almost impossible. He managed to get that right, so he understands what makes the world go round, and that's a capitalist economy, and he's an avowed capitalist, and unashamedly so, which is great. We also have stated that we will do away with broad-based black economic empowerment, because it's not broad-based whatsoever. It's about people who are connected to the government. And I go to meetings every single day of my life, and I'm in black communities, and I ask them in their thousands, have you benefited from broad-based black economic empowerment? The answer is a universal no. So it's just a get-rich-quick scheme for the people who are closest to government. They get all the big tenders, and those that don't even get tenders, they muscle their way into those that have got tenders and demand. At first, it was a 30% stake. Now it's gone up to 50%. And we have construction mafia that if you win a tender and you don't give them what they want, they will shut down your construction business. They won't allow construction to take place unless you cut them in. And these are people that don't even have a wheelbarrow, but profess to be in the construction industry. They have no engineers, they have no capacity, they have no infrastructure, they have nothing. In fact, all they want is they are greedy, and they want a part of the action, and they want to horn their way in there. So we've said that we will do away with broad-based black economic empowerment, and we've got an offer to redress the past called inclusive economic empowerment, where everyone, regardless of race or color, who cannot make it, hasn't got a job, who needs to try and find a job or to start a business, they can make an application to the Opportunity Fund, which will be funded by a levy that will be levied on all businesses in South Africa, because cost of compliance for BEE is around 4 to 6%. So the levy will charge no more than what people are currently paying to be compliant for BEE and deriving no benefit from that. And we will reinvest 25% of that annually, but we will ring fence 10% for higher education, tertiary education. 30% will go to the establishment of entrepreneurship schemes to assist young people to get into their own jobs, to create their own company. And then 35% will go to improving infrastructure and up-servicing underserviced communities. So we've got our own scheme, and we also have what you would call a universal basic income grant, where you can make an application, and if you qualify, that you would get 760 Rand a month for the first year to either go and look for a job or to start a business, 1,100 Rand a month for the second year, and then 1,600 Rand a month for the third year, and thereafter you're on your own. And if you've made it through there and you've got a job or you've started a small business, then you obviously don't need any more support from the government. The government are currently giving all poor South Africans, indigent South Africans, 350 Rand a month. Chris, I don't know what that's equivalent to, less than $20. It's about $15 a month. It cannot sustain anybody. It can't even sustain anyone's drinking habit, let alone sustain them for food for a month. And we believe that those are the kind of initiatives that will get South Africans working again, rather than deepening this kind of dependency that the ANC government has done. We have a president that goes to the State of the Nation address and breastbeats about the fact that in 1994, 8 million South Africans were dependent on social welfare, but now that there are 28 million South Africans dependent on social welfare. Now, to me, that is just mad. I mean, any president who declares that should be removed from office immediately. We believe that we would be trumpeting every million South African less dependent on social welfare, and that's our objective. We plan to bring that number way down to even below what they were in 1994, because the curse of dependency is that you are manipulated by the government, and that manipulation is compounded when the voters are so dependent that they will do almost anything to keep that money or fear of losing it. And then you have a government that takes those people for granted and says, they're so stupid, they'll carry on voting for us anyway, so regardless what we do to them. So the job of opposition parties and parties like ActionSA is to educate voters and to tell them that there is life after the ANC. And in fact, there's a much better life after the ANC. There are many examples in South Africa where the ANC have lost government and things have improved. Herman Mashaba was the mayor of Joburg, and he certainly made improvements there. And I remember when I was the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, we went from being the second worst metro to the second best metro in 1 year. And by the end of my second year in office, we had the same credit rating as the city of Cape Town. So it can be done. Things can be turned around. But unfortunately, in countries where graft and corruption become commonplace, the majority of the people who are in office, not the people who are man and the woman in the street, the majority of the people who are in office prefer chaos than order and progress, because chaos can be exploited. Now, the best analogy I can think of, the best hunting animal, most successful hunting animal on the African continent is not the lion, it's the wild dog. Because what wild dogs do, they hunt in packs and they cause chaos. And once there's chaos amongst a herd of antelope, they identify their prey and run them down and they have a meal. So they exploit chaos just like what the ANC are doing at the moment.
No, that's a brilliant analogy, and that's exactly what wild dogs do. In fact, I've seen many packs of them in the Okavango and elsewhere. They intentionally cause chaos and strike fear in their prey, and then they look for the ones who make the mistakes, and they go for them. Absolutely correct, and then 100%. It's interesting what you say there. I think that maybe the challenge for ActionSA is to get that word out to people, to let them know their positions more clearly. That's probably the biggest challenge. In politics, of course, it's whether people like it or not, it's not all about money, but money certainly plays a role, and you need to have the resources to get out there to do that. But let me ask a question. You're in the Eastern Cape, and as you said, it's a beautiful location. The province is lovely, but there is some seriously bad economic situations taking place in much of the Eastern Cape. A story that I find heart-wrenching, and unfortunately, we keep telling this tale over and over again. Again, last week, a 3-year-old child at a kindergarten creche expired after falling into a pit latrine unattended. Who sends a 3-year-old to the toilet, particularly a hole in the ground, and they die from choking on feces? It's a really sad story. It's not a one-off. It keeps happening. We had a situation in Nelson Mandela Bay where you formerly were the mayor, obviously not during your time, but when the ANC took over again, that the local government turned back 63 million rand of money that was given by the national government to ensure that small children and toddlers and infants were being fed a feeding program. They didn't have to dispense the money. They sent it back, and 15 children starved to death, according to the media. It's really heart-wrenching to see what's going on there. Does this even affect voter sentiment at all? Are people even paying attention to these tragic stories? Because this shouldn't be happening. South Africa has immense wealth, immense human capital, and immense potential. Eskom was the #1 utility in the world. It was voted just 2 decades ago. This shouldn't be the way it is. The ANC's battle plan is to blame apartheid. And while you can blame many things on the National Party and racial segregation and dispossession, at some point, people have to grow up and take responsibility for what's happening around them. Is this the election where we see people paying attention to school books that were never delivered because of corrupt BEE tenders in the Eastern Cape, and schools, 400 of them in the Eastern Cape alone, that still have pit latrines 30 years after the ANC took over governance? It's mind-boggling. I'm gobsmacked when I look at those figures, Athol.
Well, Chris, human beings are not stones. And even though, we can take a lot of punishment, and the people in this province especially are very good at taking punishment, because the ANC still has the highest majority of all the provinces here, and we come last on almost any imaginable index. Except we come first with regard to crime, we come first with regard to unemployment, and we come first with those kind of incidences that you've just mentioned. So I went to the family of the 3-year-old child. They live in a place called Duncan Village, which is the second biggest township. Sorry, not Duncan Village, Danzane, which is the second biggest township outside of Soweto. And I went to meet the family 2 weeks ago, Chris, and it was the most poignant visit. I can't explain it to you. So how do you go to a family, and what do you say to them who have lost a 3-year-old child and a grandchild? That is, people say that child drowned in a pit latrine. You don't drown in a pit latrine. You die of asphyxiation because of the gases. So I went there, and it was just, awful. And I was there with a couple of my colleagues, and we just literally went to pay our respects. We didn't know what political party these people supported or anything like that. And we said a prayer, and we sang some songs, and then they started telling us what happened. And the family then said that they'd gone to the local, can't think of the name now, the mortuary, to get a death certificate. And they were told that the doctor wasn't there. He was ill, and there was only one doctor for the whole eastern part of the province. And the grandmother was explaining that the grass was sort of waist high and the place was derelict and neglected. And all they wanted to do was bury this child and move on in their lives. And they couldn't do that without a death certificate. So I made a commitment that I'll phone a former colleague of mine who's stationed in the Premier's office, and she helped me. And within 2 days, they had their death certificate. But I left there and I felt really choked up, and I walked out the house and I was waiting in my car for my colleagues. And one of the colleagues came and said that the old grandmother who'd been talking, and in the beginning she was hardly animate at all, but she became more and more animated. She asked for a membership form for our party and a T-shirt. Well, I was like gobsmacked, and I gave them the membership form and the T-shirt, and my colleague went back. And then she came back and said, "You won't believe it, the whole family wants a T-shirt, and they want to wear it to the funeral." Now, when I said to you, human beings on stones, I have no doubt that because of their demographic and where they live, that their lifelong support would have been for the ANC, but it changed overnight when they discovered just how callous and uncaring the government is through their own tragic experience. So I have no doubt that people will not continue. I think many will still, but as I keep saying, there were 18 million South Africans that didn't vote. So they've literally cut their umbilical cord. They haven't convinced themselves yet to vote for another party. And hopefully they will identify that in ActionSA, maybe some other parties. But once that constituency is remobilized, we're going to have change very quickly in South Africa. I recall before I became a mayor in Nelson Mandela Bay, it was an ANC-dominated municipality. There was a 17 percentage point swing in that election. We grew by 10% and the ANC declined by, we grew by 7% and the ANC declined by 10%. And the ANC had said to me in the build-up to that election that there will never be a DA mayor in Nelson Mandela Bay until Christ returned. Now, there have been 3 DA mayors since then, and I'm a Christian, and I believe in Christ, and he hasn't returned yet, but there have been 3. So never is a very long time in politics, and I believe that we are on the eve of a new political dispensation, albeit in coalition governments where there'll have to be power sharing. But the days of ANC domination and hegemonic control of the whole country are over, because I think people have just had enough of the incompetence, corruption, and ineptitude of the ANC.
Well, I agree 100%. And I think the right words you struck there, Cord, are callous indifference to South Africans. That's the bottom line. A government that does not care. It's too busy focused on gobbling up tenders and doling out patronage and interfering in the affairs of countries outside South Africa, while ignoring the plight of the Rohingya in Myanmar, ignoring the plight of Sudanese all over Sudan and in Darfur, and the list goes on and on. Yet the ruling government wants to stick its nose into Gaza. But we're short on time because your other commitment cut us short here. So I want to give you a chance here as we wrap up. We didn't get a chance to talk about the multi-party charter, something I was present for the formation of at Emperor's Palace, and I've covered quite a bit. I also I've reached out to Michael Beaumont and then waiting for a response back to talk to Herman Mashaba again, as well as Michael Beaumont. But I do have another ActionSA candidate on tomorrow, a lady from the Western Cape who's wheelchair bound, Natuko. Looking forward to talking to her. Okay.
She's a wonderful lady, and I think you'll have a great conversation with her. She's an inspiration. Look, I was part of the multi-party charter. I spent 10 months with Michael Beaumont attending bi-weekly meetings. It was hard business in the beginning. We had the biggest party of the group, very arrogant, very domineering, unyielding. That changed over time, and I think at the end of the day, we forged a pre-electoral pact. It's not a coalition, it's a pre-electoral pact. The first of its kind in South Africa. The one good thing that has come out of that is that we have spent just over a year now talking to each other, learning, how to deal with each other, who to trust and who not to trust, which is good because our constitutional dispensation says that after 14 days after an election, we need to put a government together, and 14 days is never enough time. to speak to other political parties to come up with a coherent option. What happens then is, and it's all about horse trading and position mongering, and that's never a good option. So I think the weeks and months that we've put into this multi-party charter have been very positive in that regard. I also think that there's some parties that are outside of the multi-party charter who will move quickly towards the multi-party charter after the elections, because they'll have two clear options. They can either align with the ANC, MK, and the EFF, or they can align with the multi-party charter. And I think self-respecting political parties who promised something different to their voters will not simply just go back into a coalition with the ANC. I think many parties have felt just what it's like being in a coalition with the ANC. They're the most unaccommodating, adulterous kind of organization to be in a partnership with. So I think we're a long way off. At the moment, if we had an election today, if we had 40% between all the participating members of the multi-party charter, it would be a great result. But remember still, 40% is the biggest block of non-ANC votes that have ever been put together. So it is still historical. It might not get us past the post of 50% plus one, but it is enormous progress. And I think that there are a number of other political parties that are watching very carefully, that don't want to align just now before the election, but that will quickly change their position after the election. So I don't think it's been a waste of time, Chris. I think it's been illuminating for many of us. And I think it'll make the negotiations post 29 May very, very interesting. And just before I leave, it'll be completely unfair of me to talk all about South Africa and our elections. I know you guys are going into probably one of your most fraught elections ever with two really dismal options. And it's tragic that politics all over the world, in the United Kingdom, Canada, South Africa, that we've got such limited options, and the people who are contesting for power are derided all over the world. And it's quite a shame that the mighty United States can come up with the two candidates that are currently in the offing. I know it's not finalized completely yet, but it is quite strange that politics has reached such a low level. One of the main underpinning values of ActionSA is ethical leadership. And I think there's a dearth of ethical leadership all over the world. And our president, Herman Mashaba, reminds me a lot of Lee Kuan Yew, who was described by three words. The three words were meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. And I think Herman Mashaba has that in spades full. And it's a pity that more of our leaders across the globe don't have those kind of qualities.
Well, Athol Trollip, I have to agree 100%. Again, just for the interest of full disclosure for the audience, not a fanboy, but a huge fan of your time as mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. I really respected that. I was impressed by it. You dealt with a government that had to deal with it being undermined every single day in council, and efforts to unseat you, repeated efforts for votes of no confidence that were unmerited, and it was an amazing job you did there. And as you said, look at what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay in just 12 months, despite all of that. It's pretty amazing. So there's a little pat on the back. I don't know if you need that or want that, but nonetheless, it's my pleasure to give that. It's a pleasure to have you back on the program again. I've got another interview right after this, so we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much. I'm always happy to be on your program. If you ever come back, well, I know whenever you do come back to South Africa, hopefully you'll come and visit me in Port Alfred. I'll take you fishing, beautiful part of the world. But also I'd like to say to the people of the United States, you need people like Chris Wyatt to become public representatives, and then hopefully we can start improving the system, because, man, I've seen some really poor public representatives, and I think, Chris, you'd make a great public representative. It's not a mutual admiration show here. I mean what I say. You've put a hell of a lot into politics. You know more about politics than most people I've ever met. Good luck. All the best.
Well, thank you very much, Athol Trollip. I'll let you drop off, and then I'll close it up here. Folks, Athol Trollip.